All right, so we are now at 10 o'clock, so I am going to get us started. Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today for our webinar on individual prospect research with Ashley Brown. Ashley Brown is the Director of Development at Interface Children and Family Services. She brings years of development experience to this session, having served as the Director of Development at United Cerebral Palsy of LA, Ventura and Santa Barbara counties, and the Director of Prospect Research and Analytics at Cal Lutheran University. In this workshop, Ashley is going to walk us through locating new donor prospects, how to increase funding from current donors, reading 990s, and which of your current donors make the best planned giving prospects. All such valuable information during these times. So thank you so much, Ashley, for joining us and sharing your expertise today. Before we jump in, a few notes of deep appreciation I'd like to share. This session is a part of our COVID-19 webinar series, sponsored in part by the Ventura County Community Foundation. I'd like to also recognize our collaborative partnership with capacity building partners across our region. In the early weeks of COVID-19, each of us was working diligently to serve our communities and quickly recognized the power of our collective action. The center began convening our colleagues across the region on a weekly basis to coordinate our efforts. So thank you so much to our co-convening partners: the Nonprofit Resource Network in Santa Barbara, the Ventura County Community Foundation, the Santa Barbara Foundation, the Fund for Santa Barbara, Association of Fundraising Professionals, Santa Barbara and Ventura County chapters, Just Communities, Leading from Within, and Visionality. Next slide, please. You can also follow the center on the following social media channels. Next slide. These efforts also depend on individual donors just like you. As many on this call know, the Center for Nonprofit Leadership waived registration fees for attending webinars and virtual convenings through the end of June. This is actually our last one. If you would like to make a personal contribution in support of these virtual offerings, low and no cost, a gift of any size is welcome, and I will put an easy link in the chat box for your convenience. I also invite you to check out our annual organizational membership program, which would extend access to free learning opportunities for board members, staff, and volunteers. A couple of final housekeeping items is that this session is going to be recorded and made available after today's webinar, along with the slides. We kindly invite you to pose your questions using the Q&A feature, as sometimes the chat box can make it so that your questions get lost, so please use the Q&A feature. If you have any trouble with your tech during today's session, please feel free to send me, Jenny Lynn Tumalad, a message, or Cal Lutheran ITS a direct message on the chat box, and we'll assist you as quickly as we can. You are also welcome to introduce yourselves with your organizational affiliation through the chat box. So without further ado, Ashley, take it away.
Hi, everybody. Welcome, and thank you for joining me today. I miss seeing a lot of you in person, and I'm grateful that we get to share some of this time together to talk a little bit about prospect research. I think that in the past, when we've had these kind of discussions, it's felt really difficult to carve out time during our busy days to do some of this work. But in this virtual environment, when a lot of us are still sitting at home and not able to be meeting with donors on a regular basis, this really allows us the flexibility and the freedom to spend some time in our database looking at our donors and planning our work for this coming fiscal year. So I'm excited to be offering this to you. And if you have questions throughout the presentation, please feel free to put them into the Q&A or the chat box, and they'll be shared with me. I'm happy to answer as we go through. So we'll start with what prospect research really is. Prospect researchers collect, evaluate, analyze, organize, package, and disseminate publicly available information in a way that maximizes its usefulness and enables accurate and educated decision making. Now, prospect research as a field, it often is, I think, mischaracterized. What we can actually find is only publicly available information, but I think most people are unaware of how much of their information is truly available in public channels. Now, things that we can't see we'll go over as well. But really, it's a little bit of an art and a science, looking at the information we can and then being able to synthesize it in meaningful ways that create actionable steps for moving forward. Why should you spend time on prospect research? Well, research will give you and your development officers and volunteers the confidence you may need to make an appropriate ask. Everyone holds this fear of kind of over asking and offending someone, but also research help prevents under asking. Everyone knows one of the worst things you can do is to go in for your big ask with the donor and they immediately say yes. At best, you want them to at least pause, think about it, and then come back to you with that resounding yes. Research can also prevent embarrassing situations. It can keep you from referencing something that's no longer true or bringing up things that people may not want you to know. And no matter the size of your development office, implementing a research program will greatly enhance your fundraising ability. It doesn't matter if you're a one-person shop, which I'll cover some resources and tips and tricks for the one-person shop, or a more robust shop like at a university where you have an entire team dedicated to this, which is probably not many of you. So what is available? So I made a list of what publicly available information you can access typically through research tools, through your own work, so that you're clear about what is actually attainable. So biographical information, home and work addresses, and date of birth. Now, a lot of the databases give a month and a year for date of birth, so you can get a general idea, but a lot of them do not include day. You can find out information about their family, like marriage status or whether they have children. Most of these records are public, though you may have to actually go in person to courthouses to find some of this information, though most of it's becoming online. Education and degree information, professional titles and business career information, as well as directorships and board affiliations. You can also find out some personal interests, hobbies, and social concerns. So one way that you can do that is looking at their history of philanthropic giving. There are numerous tools that you can access that information, as well as political giving. And tools like LinkedIn are a really good starting point. Most people are active on LinkedIn now, have a lot of their career and business information, but I always caution to make sure that you're double checking on this. Not everyone always puts the absolute correct information on their social media profiles, and so it's always important to do a little additional checking. Also ties to your organization. So evidence of interest in your organization and its mission. Are they donating to like-size organizations with similar missions? Gift history to your organization, their typical giving level, key contacts and affiliations, and then also real estate and other assets. So you can find information on real estate holdings, both personal homes and homes they may hold in trusts underneath their name. And then just new information. People are constantly coming out and sharing information in public forums now, and that is easily accessible and can help you kind of refine your ask and refine your relationship with your prospects. Now, what prospect research is not. You cannot find net worth. There are formulas to help establish rough estimates, but it's impossible to know for certain. So why is that? Well, we can see a holding of publicly held assets, but you cannot see debt information. It is impossible to see the amount of money in someone's bank account. You can't see their credit card debt. And within real estate, you can see whether they are underwater on their home based off their mortgage holdings, but there's a lot of information that you can't find. You also cannot find stock holdings of non-officers. So in public filings, the SEC does have listings that allows you to see any stock holdings for their officer positions, which are really great tools to see whether they're holding stocks that they can actively use now, whether there's something that they have to hold for a certain amount of time. You can't always see trust information. So if they purchase property underneath the trust and it's connected to their name, then that would show up in a lot of the publicly held documents, but you can't always see private trust information, non-published phone numbers, debt information, like I said, and most truly personal information. This is learned through personal contact with the prospect. Now, I would argue that prospect research does entail some of this work through personal contact, but we'll talk a little bit about where you would find that and how you would record that moving forward. Now, what I'll really be focusing on today is half of the role of prospect development in the fundraising process, which encompasses both prospect research and prospect management. I'll be primarily discussing prospect research, which deals with the identification and cultivation of prospects. The other piece of prospect development, the prospect management piece, really refers to assisting with the movement of prospects through a pipeline process. Prospect development occurs through the fundraising life cycle, which really highlights the importance of dedicating some concerted time and resources to it in your institution. So integrating research into the development process. So prospect research should really be both proactive and reactive, which I'll go over in just a moment. A well-executed prospect research strategy results in a clear grouping of prospects that development officers can cultivate over time. Many of you in your organizations don't have time to do intense prospect research on every single individual in your database. So if you're using prospect research correctly and employing some of the tools we'll go over, you should be able to group like prospects based off various different characteristics and actually execute a strategy for how to follow up with them, how to meaningfully engage them, and how to decide when it's time to sunset certain prospects and move on. Now, in prospect identification, this is where we'll really focus on this early part of research. There are two types of research being conducted in development: reactive and proactive research. Reactive research occurs through request, whether it's creating profiles on specific prospects, making event attendee profiles, or assisting a development officer with scheduled travel plans. While it's an important and really vital role of research, I would argue the greatest value to any development team is actually proactive research, which aims to identify new prospects for discovery calls. Whether reviewing local business journals, to scouting out locations where your best prospects live and then sending someone there, proactive research can help identify numerous new prospects. Now, I'd like to spend a little bit of time going through the different types of reactive and proactive research and discuss sort of the time value for you in engaging in some of these practices. Now, prospect profiling is important. I think that it's a vital part of doing research, but I would caution against doing it at the outset before you've started to establish a relationship with a prospect. When you're short on time, it's really most valuable to do that initial meeting with your prospect first. I think sometimes going in with too much research on a prospect at that initial meeting actually inhibits you from asking the right questions to really get at a prospect's personal interests. It's better to go meet them, listen to what they say and what they share with you, and then if they've indicated interest and they're interested in getting more involved with your organization, then spending a little bit of time filling out their research profile. Event attendee profiles. Normally at this point, if we were in person, I would ask you to raise your hand if you have ever been asked to do profiles on event attendees, and usually over half of the room raises their hand. Assuming that all of you are raising your hand, because I would know no better in this environment, I'm going to caution against spending a lot of time on event attendee profiles. For the most part, they are not going to actually pay off in the ways you hope they will. When you're in an event, you know, as a development team, it's sort of all hands on deck. You're connecting with your absolute top prospects, but everyone in your organization primarily knows who they are. And other than that, you're moving through the room, you're troubleshooting through the day of the event, you're encouraging conversations with people you already know. Some of them are making introductions to people you don't know. And often the time spent on creating event attendee profiles is wasted time. I think that after an event is the perfect time to go through and really catalog the conversations you had with people that let you know that they're interested, that they were engaged, that they weren't just attending because their friend asked them to attend, and then start doing some really concerted follow-up. Travel planning is a great type of reactive research. So let's say you are going to Orange County because you already have a prospect meeting set up. Well, especially when you're traveling out of the area, which obviously is not particularly relevant at this current time, but it's useful to do a quick search in your database of other prospects that live in that area and see if there are some opportunities for discovery calls while you're down there. One of the easiest ways to get meetings with out of town people is to say, you know, I'm going to be in your area on Tuesday. I would love to meet you for coffee and have a conversation about why you've supported our organization and taking it from there. Now, proactive research We talked about some of the business journals. So locally, the Pacific Coast Business Times, looking at the Ventura County Star, paying attention to people and stocks that are moving that are within our counties. Google Alerts. So I set up Google Alerts on our organization's top prospects. I also set up Google Alerts on similar type of nonprofits in the area or keywords. So if you work in social services, pulling out some keywords that really indicate people working in that space. Same with higher education or museums, art, things like that. Travel planning can also be proactive. So by first identifying where you have the highest number of your high wealth prospects, and then actually scheduling visits to that area is a proactive way to engage with travel planning. And then predictive modeling and screening, which we'll go into more in depth in just a moment. Now, a couple proactive research reports that I pull on a regular basis that I highly recommend you start pulling if you're not already doing so at your organization: cumulative year donor reports. So I think often we get into the idea that consecutive years of giving is the most important marker. But what I found is that actually looking at cumulative years of giving is a better marker for individuals who may be planned giving prospects, but also individuals who are giving faithfully to your organization, may miss a year here and there, but aren't necessarily actively engaged with a gift officer and could really be cultivated. We've had a number of times in organizations I've worked with where we've uncovered somebody who's been giving 20 years to our organization, maybe fell off a year here and there, but had never actually been contacted, had been giving maybe $100 annually. And then through concerted cultivation, we really moved to a major donor aspect. These individuals who are giving for long periods of time without personal connection obviously believe in the mission of your organization. You're no longer selling them on why the work you do is important, but rather giving them opportunities to support you in really meaningful ways that will engage their passions as well. First-time donor reports. So most organizations are really good at identifying first-time donors. Now, the way you can follow up with them, it could be as easy as an email, acknowledging it in your thank you letters, but I would recommend making phone calls to first-time donors and finding out what inspired them to give. I think particularly in this environment where people are craving human connection and looking for ways to engage with people in different ways, getting on the phone is one of the most meaningful things that you can do with your donors. A donor retention report. So paying attention to those donors that are giving year after year. A lapsed donor reacquire report. So this is one of my favorite reports to pull. When we notice that we've had somebody who's been giving for years, stopped giving, and then started giving again, I always encourage our development officers to do some sort of follow-up with them. What inspired them to continue giving? You may hear that they stopped because of financial hardship, but are interested in giving again. Perhaps your organization did something to turn them off in the past, or maybe they're particularly excited about an initiative that you're currently working on. It's really important to engage with donors and ask them what inspired them to give, why did they continue giving, or why did they stop? And then also donor increase report. So donors that you are not actively cultivating that are slowly increasing their gift over time are important ones to look at. The industry standard is about 20 years from first gift until their first major gift. And if we look at that and we start to see trends of people who are naturally increasing their gift over time, that's a pretty good indication that they're on that pathway. Now, research resources. These are a number of ways that you can engage with prospect research. Your in-house database, however, is the best place to start for proactive research, and accurate record keeping is of the utmost importance. The reports I mentioned on the previous slide are easy, kind of low-hanging fruit for prospect research. It should be data that you're already collecting in your gift records. The reports are relatively easy to build, regardless of your database experience with report building, and can be quickly actualized when connecting with donors. Wealth screening and predictive model fall into this category as well. Now, large screenings are good to do every few years as situations change, but overall are not necessary or particularly useful on an annual basis. When I worked for the university, we had a fresh crop of prospects coming in every year with freshman incoming parents. And so we would do an annual screening just for that small group so we could identify parents before their children even arrived at the school. Now, most social service organizations or art organizations don't necessarily have that fresh crop of prospects, and you're probably running much tighter teams than in a university. Wealth screenings are really only useful if you have the staff and the ability to organize that data, put it into your database, and then actually spend some time analyzing it, which is why I usually don't recommend doing it as a regular practice. More and more vendors are moving away from overall screenings and towards predictive models, which help spot trends in your top donors and identify who in your database also fit those characteristics but are not major donors yet. Predictive modeling can be contracted out to a vendor, but can be fairly costly. But there are also ways to create less complicated models in-house, which we'll go over. Now, some other pieces, obviously purchase paper and electronic resources. Some electronic resources that are great, NOSA is a great search tool for looking at philanthropic giving. There are a number of sites that you can go to look for political giving as well. LexisNexis is one of the very best prospect research tools, but is fairly expensive. There are smaller versions. I recommend reaching out to vendors and seeing if they have some of those tools. But if you're looking for sort of the top tier, I would highly recommend LexisNexis for development professionals. Registries and directories produced locally or regionally. So again, looking at those top lists, but also recognizing that all of the nonprofits in Santa Barbara and Ventura counties are probably looking at the same lists as you. I'm sure many of you have heard from maybe your executive directors, why don't we reach out to Oprah? We all know that Oprah is on everybody's list and also will not give to any of these organizations. So it's important to recognize, I think, where your sweet spot is and which prospects are really for your organization. Donor rolls, board of director lists, annual reports. So I am not encouraging you to pilfer from other organizations' annual reports. But I think if you notice that some of your donors are on other organizations' annual reports, you need to figure that into how much they can conceivably give to your organization. It's probably unlikely that they're going to stop giving to their other passion areas. So if you see that they're giving much higher to another organization, there are two ways to look at that. Either they have the potential to give in greater amounts to your organization, or you're probably not their top charity, and that's okay, but really focusing on the ones who may be more interested in giving. It's also important to notice when you see people on annual donor rolls at other organizations that are giving more to your organization than other places. That's a pretty good indication that you're at least in their top 3. And then obviously online research. All right, prospect identification. So I wanted to share a quote that I come back to often when thinking about what data we use and how we store it. You can have data without information, but you cannot have information without data. It's important to remember that data is only as useful as what you do with it. So throughout the process of collecting and storing data in your database, it's important to always first ask yourself how this data will be used and whether it will provide usable and actionable insights to your prospects. If you can imagine all of the things you can do with it, but you know you're never going to do it, then it's probably not the best use of your time. We can run any number of reports, but in order for them to be worth your time and your organization's investment, you need to first think about how you would allow that data to design your action plan in the future. I think now, as many organizations are at the end of their fiscal year today, or maybe finished last month, this is the perfect time to start thinking about how you can more intentionally use data that's already in your database to plan out this next couple months, especially since nobody really knows what the state of philanthropy will be over the next year. When you're thinking about setting up predictive modeling internally, most models take into account combinations of the elements you see on the screen. Some, like giving history, should be weighted more heavily, as should personal affiliations with your organization. But education, family connections, business affiliation, and philanthropic interests are all very important as well. So identifying prospects, your current donors. Your first source of new prospects or any prospects should really be your own donor records. Your goal with this prospect group is to really create an actionable cultivation and stewardship plan that builds upon and enhances your donor's current relationship with you with the goal of elevating them to a higher gift level. I'm sure many of you know that moving current donors up a level into major gift donors is significantly less expensive than identifying new donors. Also, the turnover for current donors is much lower than it is for bringing in new donors and sustaining those relationships. If you're not doing a great job in your organization of really stewarding and paying attention to your current donors, then you probably don't have the time and resources to continuing to engage new donors and hope that they return every year. One thing that we always are looking at is retention rate. And if you can up the retention rate for donors that are already giving, it's much better for your organization than really focusing on acquiring new donors. So what should you be looking for in your current donors? Well, donors who have given high-level major gifts for a sustained period of time. So obviously that is your number one. And I think that most organizations know who those donors are. They have that kind of top tier donors that are giving major gifts over a long period of time that everyone recognizes and knows by name. You also want to pay attention to high-level titles, obviously, like the chief executive officer, president, partner, um, donors who have given a gift regardless of size for a sustained period of time. Now, these donors are great to transition to major gift if they have the ability, but they're also great potential for planned gifts. And we'll talk a little bit more about identifying some planned gift potential and types of gifts and ways to identify them. But for most people, a planned gift is going to be the largest gift in their lifetime and could certainly be a major gift. So how is your organization encouraging people to give this really meaningful gift and at a time, sometime in the future? And then also the relationships your current major donors have to your organization. Are they current board members? Are they former board members? Active committee members or volunteers? Do they attend a lot of your events? Are they coming to your Zooms? So if you're having sort of these town hall sessions on Zoom, are they actually attending these? Because we all know that it takes a pretty high level of engagement for someone to come and sit on their computer any more than they have to right now. All right, contact reports. This is my personal hill to stand on. Love them or hate them, contact reports are vital to a thriving prospect development program and vital to a thriving nonprofit environment. Not only do they capture important details about the prospect and their relationship to your organization, but they provide a track record of the great work you do as fundraisers and allows your organization to continue that work when you may move on. When I was at the university, I had one fundraiser in my office that I could not get to write a contact report, no matter how many times I tried. And I like to think of myself as cheerfully persistent rather than naggy. But I tried special notepads. I tried coming to this person's office and sitting there with my laptop, trying to engage them, sending them reminders, but nothing worked. One day, after months of working with a prospect, we received our first major gift from this individual, and it was a pretty large gift and really exciting for the institution. However, during our team meeting later that month, I congratulated our fundraiser on a seemingly impossible feat. I told them I checked the database and was surprised to find that this gift came in without ever once talking to this prospect. And when I said that, this person immediately raised their hand and said, well, I've been working with them for months. And I said, I don't know anything because we don't actually have any record of that. This person then started putting in contact reports. So I think it's not only to track that work, but also we know that fundraiser turnover is typically 18 months in organizations right now. Well, I would love to see that number rise. You don't want to be starting over as an organization with your prospects every time you have fundraiser turnover. And the better notes you take on that relationship, I think our donors are getting more sophisticated. I think they have a higher expectation for how they're being related to by nonprofits. And if you're not doing it, another organization is doing it and doing it well, and it will show. There are a couple key elements I always ask of fundraisers to record in their contact reports that are listed here, including their perception on a prospect's rating and inclination to make a gift. Now, it doesn't mean that you know exactly how much you're going to ask for, but I think that intuitively, we know that there are things that our prospects are sharing with us that indicate that they're maybe willing to give a gift either now, later, or perhaps a planned gift. Most important the most important one I ask for, beyond obviously recap of purpose and content of conversation, your basic biographical information. Do they have children? Did they mention that they are going to their summer home in Montana? Are they going on vacation? Did you notice in their home that they had things that look like expensive art? Were they talking about their collection? Obviously their relationship to your organization, but the most important one is actually next action. What are you going to do after this meeting, after this phone call? You want to be as specific as possible. It can be as simple as send a thank you note and invite to our next concert, or specific as in call in the second week of March to invite back to our organization for a tour. I think the more specific you are with your next action, the more likely you are to follow up on this. And I would also encourage you to not only build out this piece in whatever kind of record keeping system you have, but actually calendaring these next actions to hold yourself accountable and to make sure that you're doing them. Getting fundraisers to think ahead early has allowed us to better plan our activity for the year and better able to make projections for where we expect to be with a lot of our donors as we move through each quarter of the year. All right, proactive prospecting. So here are just a couple examples of ways that you can proactively look for prospects, looking for regional prospects or anywhere in the country. It's important to identify the reach of your organization and to be honest about that. So some of our organizations may have national reach, but many of them probably just have local reach. Are you looking for prospects in a specific industry? So one thing we think about is identifying, board members that fill certain buckets. Are we also looking for donors that can maybe get involved as a volunteer first, or that we can invite to give advice or to hear something through? Entrepreneurs, CEOs of Fortune 500s, being able to identify what type of prospects besides wealthy ones that are interested in your organization is an important skill. I think it's great to brainstorm with staff and volunteers. I encourage staff meetings where you kind of talk through prospects you may be stuck with, or ideas for people who may want to come to events, and come with some samples. So if you're holding a big gala type event, what is unique about your event? Be able to identify that, and then really think about who would be engaged with that type of event. Identifying any trending local stock. So this is where the Pacific Coast Business Times really comes in handy. Looking at, if you have someone on your board or a volunteer that has stock in a certain company, they've maybe paid you in stock, made a gift with their stock in the past, and you see that it's really trending up. Well, that's a great time. They may be feeling like they have a little additional liquidity. It's also important to notice when stocks are trending down. You don't want to over ask or put someone in an uncomfortable position. And so recognizing sort of where they might be financially is important. Identify emerging companies and markets. So paying attention to who sort of seems on the cusp of becoming successful. There's a lot of traction, maybe a lot of buzz. They're getting excited. In conversation, you find out that they just came up, they have another funder or partner. Print resources, again, the social pages are also great. Looking at Society Magazine, for instance, seeing who's attending other fundraisers, whether or not it seems like, if you go through the pages of Society, many of you who do have events may see that some people continue to crop up in these events. And then it's important to try and determine, are they interested in your organization? Or are they really interested in attending events? Both are fine. They're still supporting your organization in those ways, but it can help kind of guide activity. Checking daily gift reports. The easiest thing you can do day to day is checking your daily gift reports, making sure that you are looking every single day at gifts that came in the previous day and identifying any that require some more intentional follow-up. So do they require a phone call? Do you want to set up a meeting with this person? Are they first-time donors? This is really the ideal time. And when I mentioned that donors are getting more sophisticated, I think their expectations for how we engage with them and how quickly we acknowledge their gifts is really important. And then again, setting up Google alerts for your organization and best prospects. All right, tips for getting started on some proactive research pieces. Knowing where to go for the right information. So whether a free site, a subscription site, a volunteer, or a colleague is the key to successful research. And for anyone interested, I'm happy to share a list of resources I have for various different types of information. I believe that they'll be sharing the slides after, and I can send along this list of resources as well to share with anybody on the call. Focus your efforts and plan your strategy before you begin. The internet is vast and can seem like an endless series of links and sources. So sometimes when you start doing research, it becomes sort of this black hole where 2 hours go by and you realize you have found everything about somebody and probably not anything particularly useful. I think knowing what is useful and not getting sucked into things that can be more gossipy and not recording information that doesn't actually help you move a prospect forward is important to kind of keep in mind. Also, what is the purpose? Are you trying to figure out exactly what to ask them for? Are you going for an initial meeting, in which case you really need a lot less information than you may be able to find? Select only 2 or 3 databases and or search engines and learn them well. I recommend obviously Google. I think that that's one of the easiest ones, but I also recommend engaging in different search engines for the same prospect. The algorithms send different information to the top. You may find different things searching on different search engines, so it's always a good idea when you're getting stuck somewhere to actually look somewhere else. And then bookmark and maintain your favorite sources so they're always at your fingertips. Okay, some free prospect research sources, obviously Google, Yahoo Finance, looking at stock info, stock insiders. Okay, Zillow. So this is for all real estate sites. I always recommend obviously looking at someone's property, and these are the easiest sites to do it. But take it with a grain of salt. If anyone on this call has ever sold their home or looked at purchasing a home, and you mentioned to your realtor the Z estimate, they usually laugh in your face. So this is a best case scenario based off trends that a computer algorithm is putting out into the world for what your home value may be. What it doesn't tell you is any mortgage information, whether they need to sell at a certain price in order to make that worth it, whether they're underwater on their home. It also doesn't necessarily say what the exact trends are in that neighborhood, but it's a good indication. Now, in California, we know that real estate is highly inflated. And so having a good idea if you're looking at real estate in other states, what a high value home may be would not match what we would see in California. And so paying attention to that as well. The Federal Election Commission, so you can query by individual contributor to see if it matters to you, their political leanings. Now, one thing, whether or not, wherever they donate, research shows that individuals who contribute politically often give more philanthropically. So just finding out that they do make political contributions means that they're more likely to give philanthropic contributions, whether to your organization or another. GuideStar. So looking at Foundation 990s is really important. Family foundations, private foundations, public foundations. You can make a free profile and access 990s, and we'll go through towards the end of this webinar how to kind of read a 990 and what information is important. SEC.gov, looking at proxy statements and annual reports, and then looking at more specific to employment and occupation. So attorneys, doctor finders, and then general directories. Sometimes you can still find phone numbers or emails. A lot of it, they encourage you to sign up. I never sign up because I often just get spam email then. Subscription online resources. So LexisNexis for Development Pro I shared, but also Wealth Engine, Target Analytics, and Donor Search. So I put them together. They do some of this wealth searching for you. They're generally at a lower price point than some of the other larger resources and can really help kind of guide and focus your work. These organizations also do predictive modeling, sometimes within the database, sometimes for an additional charge, but it's definitely worth kind of talking through how they can help you look at your database in a more organized way. Hoover's looking for business research. NOZA, like I mentioned, has a lot of philanthropic giving information. And then obviously Foundation Center is worthwhile. Things to keep in mind. Again, don't try to use Google for everything. Use it in addition to your other systems or as a starting point for research. Common names as well as junior, senior can present accuracy issues. So I can't tell you how many times we have had someone named John Smith and I'm looking at 10 of them across my screen and can't actually identify which one it is. This is when having that personal contact with the prospect, recording when they mention something about their employment information or their relationship information is important to help you kind of hone in on who it is you're looking for. And then knowing that every research system has gaps and potentially misses a piece of the puzzle. So you're never going to find everything you're looking for. You're probably going to find a lot of things that you think are important but are not. And knowing that it's an ongoing process, that people's philanthropic leanings, their financial security, all of that can change, as well as their family relationships and affinity for your organization. Don't rely too heavily on real estate value. Discovering a rich person in your city or county doesn't necessarily mean they will make a major gift to your organization. Again, people who already give or who are already organically connected to your organization are your best potential prospects, and it really behooves you to start there. And then international prospects in general are extremely difficult to research. Most databases don't have information outside the US and Canada, and so they are building out more robust databases, but what information is required to be reported, what's considered public, varies widely across country lines. And so really this presentation is specifically on more domestic research pieces. All right, so you've researched, now what? So you've done all this research, you have all of this great actionable data, and now what? So particular focus really must be placed on the top 5 to 10% of donors in your database. Statistically, we know that 80 to 90% of the gifts you receive will come from this 5 to 10%. So while many organizations are saying we need new prospects, we need to bring in new people, let's have a lot of get to know our organization events. At the end of the day, the people that are already engaged with your organization are probably the most likely to stay engaged. And then how do you manage the work to make sure the focus is there? So many of us are in small shops, we're maybe 1-2 person teams, and this can feel really overwhelming when you're thinking about how do I fit this into all of my daily work. So some common metrics that you can record to see if this is kind of working and if your research is leading you anywhere. Paying attention to ROI. I think that there's a misnomer that we need to continually tamp down on overhead in the nonprofit sector, but I think that there's a reason, and I think research is one of those pieces that really points at needing to spend a little bit additional resources to build out the framework of our organizations so that we're able to raise more money. But within that cost to raise $1, increase in response rate and number of gifts. So paying attention to the number of gifts you're giving, as well as increase in number of donors. So are you having more donors that are giving more gifts throughout the year from your research, or are you really engaging new individuals? Increase in dollars raised, and then increase in percent of participation. So a lot of organizations are already recording those type of metrics, but what about these metrics? Your retention rate. I'm hoping that many of you know your retention rate, but how many donors are you keeping from year to year? Again, the cost to retain donors is much lower than the cost to acquire new donors and really should be a focus of your organizations. Upgrades. Do you know how many donors upgraded this past year? Did they upgrade over the course of multiple gifts? Did they upgrade with one gift? And for the ones that are giving multiple gifts, are they great options for recurring donors? Can you have that conversation with them about setting up monthly donations that may increase their annual giving? And then net gains and losses. Did the new donors you brought into your organization outweigh the donors you lost? So the number of donors, but also the dollars. And I've found that most organizations don't actually know that information. So paying attention to, great, I think that it's always exciting to think that we're bringing new donors in, but is it balancing out? Are we actually exceeding it? Because some organizations are going to be more transaction focused, I think, and you're going to see new donors coming in all the time, donors falling off when they're no longer being engaged. And so paying attention to that is really important as well. Okay, so now we're going to switch a little bit from some of the prospect research piece to the role of analytics in research. So before we start that, I really want to talk about what analytics means. I think that people hear that and think it needs to be this really complicated system that is hard to actually put into place in your organizations. The definition: information resulting from the systematic analysis of data or statistics, the use of descriptive techniques and predictive models to gain valuable knowledge from data. So I'm going to break down 3 different types of analytics that you may be interested in using. And they'll fit your organizations based off time and resources, include data mining, predictive modeling, and benchmarking to track progress within your own office. So data mining, it analyzes data to detect patterns and trends in your current donors to identify who future donors may be. Predictive modeling allows data to be used to foresee different scenarios. And then benchmarking, just measuring and comparing metrics of your work to others or within your organization. So how are you performing year over year? How are you performing year to date compared to previous years? And then also finding some partner organizations that may be willing to share their numbers with you and really engage in this process. Okay, data mining. So data mining is the most straightforward way to begin using the data in your database to identify new opportunities for giving and cut down on the amount of time it takes to navigate through your database. This could include pulling queries on keywords from contact reports to identify people who previously expressed interest in a given topic. So let's say that you are an arts organization and someone is particularly interested in classic art, and you put that in a contact report. You can query on that, and when you have a new exhibit coming through or you're raising money for something, those are really key prospects that you can already engage in who've already expressed interest. Also, pulling together metrics data on your appeals to identify the best solicitation methods for donor acquisition versus renewal versus upgrade for your various campaigns, and then applying those results to your next appeal. Revisiting this data is important to ensure that you're reaching the donors you intend and the results are what you expect. Data mining is also great for pulling together event lists. So this is where screening contact reports is useful again, but most importantly, it can allow you to find patterns in giving. For instance, you can pull the average number of years a major donor gave before giving his or her first major gift to your organization, whatever your institution decides that is. Wealth screening. So as I mentioned before, wealth screening is a great way to get through a large number of records with little time and resources to refine where to best spend your time. While many vendors and institutions are moving towards predictive modeling, wealth screening still has an important place in identifying new potential prospects. However, extensive planning should be put into a screening project that identifies who needs to be involved before you ever run the screening, how that data will be stored in your database, and how you intend to segment and use the results. Wealth screenings are only as good as the pre-planning that goes into it before. I'm sure many of you over the course of your careers have done a large wealth screening at your organizations, gotten back thousands and thousands of records with information, and then it just kind of dies in your database because you don't know how to use it, you don't have time to go through it. And so doing some of this pre-planning and really planning out what type of reports you plan on pulling from it and what those next steps might be is really important. Any wealth screening project should be preceded by conversations with important stakeholders, including maybe your fundraising leadership and gift officers, any advancement services individuals, so your database team, as well as your executive director and your board members. So how do you plan to use this? Are your board members involved in fundraising? If so, they should have an idea of what the next steps might be before they make an investment in wealth screening for your organization. Clean data is of the utmost importance if the screening is going to produce reliable results. So your data entry staff or yourself are really key in this early planning step. If you don't have clean addresses, if you have not updated names, if you have different salutations in different fields, then it's important to really try and universalize that and clean it up, because wealth screening can only pull data from where you tell it to pull from. And it's important that it knows where it's going and that you're as reasonably sure that you can that the data is current. One thing I do recommend before doing any sort of wealth screening, if you don't already, is running your databases addresses through the NCOA, the National Change of Address, through the Postal Service, to make sure that anybody who has set up mail forwarding or may have moved, that you have an updated address for them. Additionally, you should have a plan for how you intend to segment your results, and there should ideally be a separate plan by major planned giving and annual giving prospects, whatever your organization considers those to be. All right, and then predictive modeling. So there are several types of predictive models that you can engage with for your organization, but depend on several factors: resources, how clean your data is, what type of financial investment and time investment you can make. Prospect research and screenings will reveal potential capacity, affinity, and past current relationships. Predictive modeling, however, is a method by which data is analyzed to help determine the actual probability that a prospect will make a gift, be it major, annual, or planned gift. Predictive modeling is often applied in two different ways. So one, you apply predictive modeling first, and then you do a wealth screening on a particular subset of the population. Or you can do a wealth screening first, get all of that data, and then use predictive modeling to help rise up that top 5 or 10% of your database as a way to kind of organize that data as it comes back. Predictive models look to include indications of involvement, affinity, engagement, affiliation, loyalty, and enthusiasm for your organization. When you're thinking about how to set up predictive modeling, most models take into account some combination of these elements. When you're measuring engagement, you're looking into participation in activities. So tracking this information is important. Are you tracking event attendance? Are you tracking the individuals who are attending town halls or information sessions, or are coming to free nights that your museum is putting on, or coming to talks? Commitment can be giving back to your institution, both financially or in their time, and it relates to recorded donation and volunteer history. And then affinity is obviously harder to measure, as it's looking to quantify feelings of emotional and intellectual closeness to your organization. If you're looking to create your own inclination scores, there are several ways to go about it with varying levels of investment. So there's an additive model, which is really simplistic. Pick a few factors and assign them each 1 point, run your database against these factors, and add them up. So let's say you are looking for whether they've donated in the past 5 years is 1 point, whether you have current contact information for them, 1 point, whether they allow you to email them, 1 point, whether you have their marital status, 1 point, and then just running your entire database against those data points and seeing who comes to the top. Weighted point score, while more reliable, can also be a little bit subjective. So this is giving higher weight to certain factors that you think establish a higher level of closeness to your organization. So let's say you think donation history is far more important than whether or not you have current contact information for them. So you assign their donation 3 points in the past 3 years, but their contact information 1 point, and then adding those up. And then a statistical model is really a logistical regression and factor analysis, and usually requires someone who knows a great deal about analytics and has the time to invest in working like this. Most organizations don't have the staff or the ability to do this on their own, and this is really, if you're looking to build statistical models, where I would recommend reaching out to an organization that does this, or a vendor. Although it's most often used to identify major gift prospects, predictive modeling can also rank groups like these: annual giving prospects, who are most likely to renew; people who are likely to be good board and volunteer candidates. So if you find that they're hitting high numbers on all of these other factors, but are not actively engaged as volunteers with your organization, this is a great way to start engaging them. Planned giving prospects, if you're looking at number of years giving, consecutive, cumulative; people who would be great prospects for a specific project or campaign. Like a library fund or an endowment. Maybe this is based off keywords in their contact reports. People who would most likely accept a request for a visit. So if you're finding that they're scoring high on everything else and you've never spent time with them in person, then this is a really good indication that they're probably feeling engaged and would be willing to at least entertain a phone call. Top level annual giving prospects, and then Yeah, predictive modeling essentially can help you narrow down and identify prospect capacity and lapsed donor potential by predicting future giving behavior. You can outsource predictive modeling to a number of vendors, use any of the modeling techniques I gave on the previous slide, or if you're short on resources, you can use a simple velocity score to begin ranking your prospects, which is right here. So this is probably the easiest way for you to go about creating a predictive model that is really easy for your organization. It includes elements of predictive modeling by taking a donor's total giving in the most recent year and divides it by their average giving over the last 3 years. So this is the perfect time, as many fiscal years are winding down, to try and employ a velocity score for your donors. Donors with scores greater than 1 are accelerating and may be warm prospects, while donors that are giving is going down based on their average over the previous 3 years and maybe cooling down. Pairing something like a velocity score with a wealth screening can help your organization narrow in on major gift prospects with capacity that have shown some affinity and warmth to your organization in recent years. So this is just a really great, easy tool that anyone can employ in their database today. And what I recommend is that you run a velocity score maybe twice a year. So doing it at the halfway point and identifying, whose giving has gone down in this current year, or who hasn't given a gift, or their giving has decreased, as you look at the second half of your year as well. All right, segmenting donors is also really important. Screenings can vary in size, but always present a challenge in how you target results. Segmentation is a strategy and process whereby you select manageable groups of names for validation and then roll out further development, new prospects, and upgrades. In-depth research should only be focused on major gift potential returns. So for our small shops, you really only want to be focusing on this really intentional, really in-depth prospect research on your top level prospects. Others should be moved to annual fund or a broad planned giving process that you put in place before screening, and then roll out, whether it's receiving annual appeals, being invited to participate in a newsletter, whether you want to send them specific information on planned giving opportunities with your organization, and inviting them to come back and contact you if they're interested. As you begin to research the major giving names, those that rise to the top can move towards personalization then as they start moving through their donor life cycle. Okay, and for just a general donor pyramid, I adapted this from James Greenfield's Evaluating and Managing the Fund Development Process. This is really the only piece that really focuses sort of on that prospect management piece. But how we engage with donors based off this segmentation is also really important. So your annual giving, when you're focusing on acquisition, these are the donors that you can engage with direct mail, online phone-a-thons, special events, general media pushes, and door-to-door solicitations. He included, I don't know how often we're doing those pre or post-COVID, but certainly not right now. And also, I don't necessarily recommend that you just show up randomly at someone's door. Now, as you want to move to repeat annual giving, that's when you have a little bit more personal contact. Maybe you are personalizing some of those acknowledgement letters, giving them specific phone calls, inviting them to really targeted events instead of your mass gala events. And then moving to special and major gifts. So focusing again on that personal contact. This is maybe you are inviting them to an unveiling of a building or a new initiative. You are reaching out to see if they'd be willing to meet for coffee. A personal letter, so not necessarily your stock letter that you're sending out as an acknowledgement, and again, phone calls. And as you move towards major gifts, capital, endowment gifts, the only way that those should really be cultivated and solicited are through really intentional personal contact. And then planned gifts, wills and bequests. Through your work at any of these levels, many organizations find out that they're in somebody's will after they pass. So how could we more intentionally cultivate some of our donors in these other stages to encourage them to think of their favorite organizations in their will? So This is how I think of it. Moving from annual giving to repeat annual giving is really identifying those individuals. When you want to move people from annual giving as a total to special and major gifts, it's about informing them about priorities, about your organization. As you want to really move them into the major gift category, you need to focus in on their specific interests and then also really involve them in the process. And to go into your top tier major gifts or to consider a planned gift, you're really asking them to invest in your institution and the future of your institution. They believe in your mission, they believe that you're going to be around and steward their money well. And it's really kind of a vote of confidence from your donor to your organization. Okay, so now that I've shared some information on our identification metrics, I wanted to share some of the metrics we use in our general prospect management system. One thing I recommend is starting with smaller portfolios. And not only does this allow fundraisers to spend more time developing their best prospects, but it allows them to focus and work more efficiently with each donor. So what information is already in your database that you can use? Number of years giving before their first gift of $1,000 to $10,000. I consider those transitional gift donors. They're giving in a way that feels intentional. And typically at the higher end of that, they can become major donors to your institution. Maybe it's encouraging multi-year pledges, but it shows your organization's maturation of cash donors. Are you moving people up when they're hitting that $1,000 level? Or are they just staying there because they're not being invited to invest in a more meaningful way? And highlights the importance of early stewardship. So how quickly are we moving people through those levels? Patterns of giving and behavior before major gift donors. I think that most organizations have maybe 5 donors that they keep at the top of their list that they keep going back to. I recommend going back and looking at their records and seeing their pattern of behavior and their pattern of engagement and seeing if anyone else is starting to replicate some of those patterns in the early stages. And then obviously the source of original gift for mid-level donors. Are they giving cash outright? Are they making gifts of stock? You can kind of determine different ways that people are getting sophisticated in that way and what type of donor they may be. So identifying planned giving potential is a little bit of a different beast than identifying major gift donors. And there are 2 types of information to look at for planned giving prospects. So there's the donor nonprofit connection, obviously, and then statistical information that you can identify. All right, for the donor nonprofit connection, so looking at frequent past donations. Donors who have contributed in the past are more likely to donate in the future. It's just common sense. So additionally, a pattern of increased giving over time can indicate that a donor might be a good planned giving prospect. Individuals who plan to leave donations to a nonprofit don't often just randomly select an organization they have no connection with. They choose a nonprofit with whom they have a history of giving and or volunteering, or maybe it's close to a family member or a connection that they had and they feel compelled to give without necessarily engaging with your nonprofit directly. Belief in your mission. Donors who are strongly connected to your organization and actively seek to help you fulfill your goals show their dedication to your cause. While conviction and commitment to your organization will likely come in the form of monetary donations, it can also manifest itself in volunteer hours. Looking at how strongly a donor or volunteer believes in your organization can help determine whether or not they have the potential to be a planned giving donor. And I really caution people looking for only wealthy prospects for planned giving donor potential. There are many ways to give a planned gift, including a percentage of perhaps an insurance policy that most people may have in place. Desire to give a major gift. Donors and volunteers who consistently give small donations over months and years show a commitment to your organization. However, most people simply will not be able to give a major gift in their lifetime. And by identifying donors who have expressed interest in wishing they could give a major gift, wishing they could give more, you can determine who might be a good planned giving prospect and open to that conversation. And then also just positive interactions with your nonprofit. If donors are positively impacted by the work you do, if you are a social service provider and years down the road someone comes back and shares that you as an organization have changed their life and are looking for ways to get involved and to give back, that's also a good indication that they could be interested in doing a planned gift. So some statistical information to pay attention to. Age. So older donors generally are more likely to be thinking about planned giving donations, but increasingly we're seeing that individuals as early as their mid 30s and 40s are starting to think about really putting into place their estate plan. You can promote planned giving with all of your donors, but it's obviously wise to really pay more attention to people who may already have a will in place or don't necessarily have young children. Marital status. So statistically, donors who are married understandably leave money to their spouses. Single or widowed donors, however, are more likely to include an organization in their will at an early point in its iteration. Like I mentioned with children, donors who do have children tend to leave their money to them. If a donor has no children or no spouse, they're more inclined to make room for an organization in their will or trust. Property ownership is a huge key for identifying a planned giving potential. Usually a nonprofit's planned giving prospects we think of them as wealthy individuals, but it doesn't necessarily have to be wealth, but owning property is a huge indication that they may have the ability to leave an estate gift. And then gender. So the statistics show that females are generally more likely to leave planned gifts than males. I wouldn't necessarily recommend guiding your strategy around this. Part of this may have to be just because generally women tend to live slightly longer than men and are usually making those final decisions, whereas a lot of the men are passing on their wealth to women and so their spouses. And so I would think through this, kind of do with this point what you will, but statistically that's what we see. So I wanted to share a couple of profiles of potential planned giving donors that can vary slightly by type of planned gift. And there are a huge array of planned gifts. I'm certainly not an expert. I know just enough to be dangerous, but I'm really focusing on just a few bequests, charitable gift annuities, and charitable remainder trusts, which many of your organizations may deal with. So a majority of planned gifts, nearly 90%, are going to be bequests. And this is just people leaving your organization in their will. So the average profile of a bequest donor: consistent, loyal donors in their mid 40s to late 50s and mid 60s to late 70s who appear to be at the life stage at which estate planning is active. Mid-level and up homeowners. Established home ownership. So when you notice when you're doing your prospect research that their home was purchased several years ago, that means that there's probably additional equity in that property. When someone just purchases a home, it's probably pretty likely that they don't have a lot of equity in it, which can affect how they do some of their estate planning. Children in college or evidence of education-related debt. So paying attention to whether or not, if they're giving widely to their children's education at the time, one of the ways to engage them currently, because they're unlikely at that point to make a major gift to your organization, but is engaging them in a planned giving discussion. If they're giving charitable gifts to other organizations at $100 or less. So these are your loyal donors that are giving consistently, but maybe don't have the capacity to make a major gift, but really believe and are truly philanthropic. Individuals who are volunteering. So one of the biggest gifts we can ask from our constituents is a gift of their time. And people who are willing to volunteer for our organizations, keep our organizations running, and really give selflessly in that way. This can be an important way for them to leave a legacy for themselves and for their families. And then other types of loyalty indicators, such as membership, if you have a membership program, or ticket buying history. So they're engaging with your organization, maybe not particularly active donors in an unrestricted way, but are engaging monetarily in different types of ways. Additional markers to look for: real estate holdings other than their primary residence. So you may find this through research. Again, like I said, in conversation, they may mention that they're going to their home in another location, or they spend the summers here, or they're going to their family cabin. Any of those should pique your interest. Private business holdings of at least $1 million. Business ownership generally. So business owners, they usually have some equity stake in that business. Collective known assets of $2 million or more. And then a big one is connections to a family foundation or a donor advised fund. Now, remember, a bequest donor doesn't have to be a major gift prospect or have major gift capacity to make a really high-end planned gift. Some of the largest planned gifts I've seen have come from individuals who never gave more than $200. Charitable gift annuities. So charitable gift annuities are especially attractive to donors during slow economic times historically. You're typically looking at donors late 60s to mid 70s and older, small 1 to 2 person households, so either with grown children or no children, evidence of retired status. Women who are single or widowed tend to favor the simple format of gift annuities. Annual gifts of charitable gift annuity donors are generally less than $100. So they may be living off of fixed income, are still looking to engage and donate to your organization, but don't have a lot of expendable income. And then, while typically well off or comfortable, these donors generally share conservative fiscal values and want their assets to continue to work for them. They're charitably inclined, but maybe give to multiple organizations. So you may be in their top 5, but they give widely and will continue to give widely. Some other potential markers to look for: business titles that indicate kind of an elevated status prior to retirement: president, vice president, director. Inclusion in a wealthy individuals database. So if you're doing any of these wealth screenings and they come back with a high marker for any of those wealth screenings, but you know they're at an advanced age, they may fall into this bucket. Evidence of securities investments that are conservative in nature. So paying attention if they are giving gifts of securities or stock to your organization. Looking at the risk value of that stock over time. Are they holding generally stable stocks? Do they seem like they're holding something a little bit more on the risky side? And then evidence of charitable gift annuities or planned estate gifts at other organizations. So you may not always know this unless they share it with you, but this is one of the ways that another organization's annual reports can be an indication if you're looking for planned giving evidence at another organization for one of your top donors. Since these donors are typically fiscally conservative, gift planning patterns that mimic retirement savings might make sense, which is why CGAs are generally attractive. And then charitable remainder trusts. So these are a more complicated giving vehicle. Very few organizations are receiving gifts through CRTs, but generally mid 50s to mid 70s. Similar characteristics to major donors. So high asset bases, expensive homes. These are already your wealthy donors that are usually employing some more sophisticated giving techniques. They may have given significant gifts to you in the past in the form of cash or securities. Wealth indicators. So again, through wealth screenings that indicate financial portfolios of $5 million plus or a household income of $250,000 or more. Professional positions that denote an aggressive fiscal position, such as CEO or chair. Entrepreneurs and the self-made wealthy. So real estate developers are a really good area to look for CRTs, and investors, as well as professionals in finance, investing, law, and medicine. So a lot of these donors that end up giving CRTs, they have inconsistent giving patterns. So these are not necessarily your loyal donors. They give at high levels when things are going well, then they fall off when they're not. They may give a large gift and then decide that that's good for them for a couple years and then re-engage. So these kind of erratic giving patterns at high levels are good indications. And then generally charitably inclined, but give to multiple organizations. Again, could have given a large gift to your campaign. I think that donors to endowment campaigns are particularly good candidates for this type of gift, or capital campaigns that are not looking necessarily for direct service provisions, again, including wealthy individuals, and have property holdings of $10 million or more. Again, easier said than easier in California than other locations. So I recommend, if you're looking at donors out of state, maybe right sizing that $10 million level for an appropriate level in that state. Okay, and now we're going to move to foundations, because there are slight differences when cultivating foundations and doing research on foundations than there are just individuals. And the first thing that you need to pay attention to is who's determining gift decisions. Is there a board? Is there an executive committee? And what are the philanthropic goals of the company or the CEO board or that foundation? So corporate foundations usually have a very clear mission statement, and they're very methodical about outlining what they do and don't fund, their service areas, what type of projects, and may give examples of other projects that they funded, which are important to look at. Some family foundations are a lot looser. Maybe they have some general areas that they're interested in giving to, but really what they do is they make these gift decisions and conversations. So having one family member on their board who really believes in your mission can make you a much more likely candidate than fitting their mission exactly, but not knowing anybody or cultivating that relationship. Paying attention to whether they require a formal proposal or grant request, if they take unsolicited proposals. And then when looking to rate prospects on foundations, you need to look at corporate profits, if they're corporate foundations, and foundation assets and grant history. Does your organizational mission match their interests? So sometimes what they say on their website that they are interested in funding and what they actually fund don't match. And it's much better for your organization to make sure that you really match the funding priorities of the organizations they're already funding, as opposed to what they say on paper that they're interested in funding. Is your gift request in line with their giving history? So this can be right sizing amount of your gift as well as what you're asking for. So the biggest tool when you're looking at private foundations is looking at the IRS Form 990 private foundation. Private foundations are a unique class of 501c3 organizations and have their own version of the IRS Form 990. It reads slightly differently and can be anything from maybe 3 pages for your really small foundations to really robust 990s that can be 80 plus pages long. And so we'll go through kind of what pieces you actually need to pay attention to so you don't need to go through all 80 pages. 990 PFs require a detailed disclosure of revenue and expenses by category. While this is similar to other versions of a tax return, it differs in focus to reflect activity more in line with how private foundations operate. And private foundations are generally required to distribute roughly 5% of the foundation's financial assets. So Part X of a 990 PF calculates the minimum investment return, which is then used to calculate the distributable amount. So looking at the 990, what do you actually need to read for research purposes? So obviously contact information. Most 990s will give you a phone number, an address, occasionally an email, but will tell you who the direct contact person is, who their board members are. Foundation assets, so being able to identify if you know that they are generally required to give away 5% of their assets, this is a good indication of whether or not your organization's request of $25,000, $100,000 is within the frame of feasibility. Contributions received. So did they get an influx of money? Maybe another foundation folded into it and their assets in the coming year will be much larger. So typically 990s are released almost 2 years back. So you'll see if they've had a large influx of cash in the past and then maybe their 5% has increased. Grants made. So this is probably the most important part of a 990 is looking at what organizations the foundation has supported in the past and at what level. Expenses, total assets, some interesting questions. So we'll go through that in a minute. Obviously, directors, officers, trustees, and highest paid employees. So let's say you're looking at a new foundation. I always recommend looking at who their board of directors are and who's affiliated to see if there's maybe any organic connection to your organization through one of these individuals. That's also a great way to engage volunteers and board members is to share with them lists of directors and officers and trustees of foundations that you're thinking of reaching out to and seeing if they have some connection or they have some way to get around. That's one of the most effective ways that I've seen boards really engage with the work of fundraising without having to go out and ask for money or necessarily open their personal networks. Information regarding programs occasionally and grants paid. So the difference between grants made and grants paid would be a way that you can see multi-year pledges that foundations have made. So if they've made a pledge in 2015 15, but are paying it over several years, you'll see that in the grants paid section. So you'll know, okay, well, they made a $100,000 pledge 5 years ago. This is the 5th year, and they made a gift of $20,000. So reasonably, we can assume that that money would open up next year. All right, so basic facts about the filer exist at the top of the private foundation form. Outlines whether an organization is on the calendar year or a separate fiscal year. So you'll see up at the top, right below the 990, it says for calendar year blank or tax year beginning blank and ending blank. So this is important for knowing, are you requesting funding at the beginning of their fiscal year cycle? So that's obviously the best time to reach out to foundations for funding, unless they've specifically stated a different grant funding cycle. Contact information for the foundation, and then the fair market value of the foundation's assets at the end of the year. So assets, again, are one way of evaluating the size of a foundation. In general, private foundations must meet or exceed an annual payout requirement of 5% of the average market value of its assets. So looking at that information, and you'll see that in I, section I, is really important. All right, so now in part 1 of the 990, you'll see analysis of revenue and expenses. So part 1, line 1, provides the amount of contributions, gifts, or grants the foundation received during the year. This might be of interest to grant seekers, particularly if it sees a drastic increase in foundation assets from the previous year. So again, I most commonly see that when another foundation has transferred assets, maybe when 2 family foundations have collapsed into one, or something along those lines. Part 1, line 25, column D, provides the amount of contributions, gifts, and grants paid by the foundation during that year. It does not include grants authorized, so pledges again, but not paid in the year of filing. Grants in column A are grants authorized for the year of filing, but not necessarily paid. And then line 26 shows total expenses for the year, including fees, overhead, and grant making activities. So in part 7A, number 3 is really important. Has the foundation made any changes to its bylaws in that year? So this is important for understanding if there was a change in how they will be distributing grants, how they will be soliciting proposals. If they mark yes here, then that's a really good indication. It's usually filled out later out in the 990. 5, was there a liquidation, termination, dissolution, or substantial contraction during the year? So important to see if it's looking like the foundation is sunsetting some of its assets or will be sunsetting activities in the future. 8A, which state does the foundation report its activities? So this is important to know. Are they local to the state that you're in? So does it only say California? Or do they have a wider range, whether it's looking at the Pacific Northwest? Are they national? Are they really focusing grant making in the South? You know, being able to get an idea of what states and the reach of their grant making activities is really important. And then 10, did anyone become a substantial contributor? If yes, must detail in a separate schedule. So was there any massive infusion of money into the foundation in that current year? Part 8 is important. It lists all current officers, directors, and trustees and their compensation. Is the filer directed mainly by a single family, or does it have broad public representation? So again, family decisions and family foundations end up doing their grant making in a very different way than some of the larger foundations. Start research here once you've determined a particular foundation might be a good fit. Do you have any ties to a particular board member, or again, does anyone in your organization potentially have an in? Part 9A asks foundations to list the 4 largest direct charitable activities during the year. And then most foundations have a supplemental list of grants and contributions paid during the year or approved for future payment at the end of their 990. So if they've given very few grants, it may be included in this area. Most of them are actually towards the end in a separate schedule. This is the most important part of the 990 to study. So I don't know if, yeah, I did that. Okay. Information regarding payments. So in part 15 is where you'll find out information about applying to the foundation. They'll indicate, do they only give to pre-selected charitable organizations? So this is a great place to check to see if you're wasting your time. If they are only give to pre-selected organizations and you have no direct connection or no way of getting a direct connection, then it's probably not worth submitting an LOI and spending that time. If that's not marked and it's showing that they're open to receiving unsolicited grant proposals, then you can kind of keep looking. Foundations often attach a separate paper that outlines their programs and goals, including limitations to their giving. If not, that information can be found in this section as well. You'll see that A, B, C, and D have information about their grant making activities. You'll see this filled out more for the less sophisticated foundations or some of the smaller ones that are able to fit all of that information in this small area. Most larger foundations have this information readily available on their website or will attach a separate schedule as well. All right, and then grants and contributions. So foundations are required to list all grant recipients by name, the purpose of the grant, which can be very broad, and the amount given. So the purpose can be extremely specific to a project or could just say something like capital, program. This list, again, is often provided as a separate listing at the end of the 990. Gifts of all size are reported here. Line 3B is for grant recipients who are already approved for future payments as listed. These are the multi-year awards. So I'm sure many of your organizations have received notification that you will be receiving a grant award over X amount of years that will start paying out in the following year. So you would be listed in this schedule. This is how you can check to see kind of that approved for future payment against paid during the year to get an idea of how much more funding they may be having to these organizations and what might be freeing up in the coming year. You should review several years of 990s for organizations that you're interested in applying to retrieve this information about multi-year grants and to see whether certain organizations are repeatedly supported. So do they, even though they're open to receiving proposals from new organizations, are they really only funding the exact same organizations year over year? What's their typical grant size? So this can make sure that you are asking for an appropriate size grant. If most of their grants are in the $5,000 to $10,000 range, and you put in an application for 50, then you better have a pretty good indication based off personal relationships that that's likely. It's better to apply for something that feels within the realm of possibility so that you can start establishing that relationship. And larger foundations, again, often have websites and or issue annual reports that provide a description of the grant in cases where the 990 does not. So a lot of annual reports will go into more detail about what the actual grant funded and specific programs, which can help you align something in your organization to their personal interests. So remember, financial information is more meaningful if viewed over a period of several years. So 990 from 1 year is a snapshot in time, and you don't really know if there was something unique that happened in that year, if there was some sort of financial challenge that that personal foundation faced, whether it had something to do with their stock portfolio, or whether they really dedicated to giving a large amount of money out in a certain year. So I think one of the conversations we're hearing right now in the midst of this pandemic is a lot of foundations are starting to look at their giving for the coming years and reprioritize where some of that funding is going to go and what their expenditures may be. I don't know what the answer to that's going to be, but if you only look at 990s and only base it off that information, you may be ill positioned, I think, moving forward in this next year. And financial indicators such as the percentage spent on fundraising or programs is often misleading. So comparing the financial indicators of very different organizations probably doesn't provide any useful information to potential donors. Okay, and then this is a small piece of what we're talking about, but as you're doing prospect research, one thing I like to look at is officer portfolios. So how are you organizing your own personal work and making sure that it's getting done? And the number one thing I like to caution against is avoiding bloated portfolios, portfolios that are too large and ultimately unmanageable. I really encourage organizations to make a conscious effort to reduce portfolio size, to free fundraisers to focus on the top prospects and really fully develop relationships with them. Often, some of our next biggest donors that we don't know yet come from relationships with our current largest donors who are cultivated intentionally, stewarded appropriately, and then feel comfortable recommending your organization to their friends and other acquaintances. This tactic really allows for more focused activity with top prospects and moves officers through the pipeline more efficiently. All right, portfolio management. So I know this can be hard, but I never ever like to see more than 100 major gift prospects in any portfolio. Some may have closer to 150. It can depend on your workflow. Some have less, but I use 100 as like general baseline. And then within that, I like to establish as much of a balance as possible so that we're not exhausting all of our prospects at once and then finding that we can't follow through with them in really meaningful ways. So we have about a quarter of prospects in qualification. So these are those early relationships you're building. These are the donors of tomorrow. About 30% in cultivation. So those are the donors that you're actively working with, that you've identified have some sort of capacity or interest in your organization, and you're really trying to grow that. 25% in pre-solicitation or solicitation. So those are your asks. Those are the ones that you are actively working with. You have a project in mind. You're either waiting for a response or planning the ask. And then another 20% in identification and stewardship. So making sure that you don't stop with your donor relationships just because they've given their major gift. We know that our major gift donors of today are our best major gift prospects for tomorrow, but what it takes is really intentional plan to keep them engaged over time. Tracking prospect status tells us also whether we're moving towards our goals and allows us to identify stalls and hiccups in our progress before they become issues that kind of derail our fundraising goals in the future. Once an officer qualifies a prospect through a discovery call, it's ideal to really sit down and discuss a target ask amount and a date for a specific project with an understanding that these are moving targets and are fluid and will change as you get to know your prospects more, but can also help for some planning and projection for the coming years, which every organization wishes that they were able to have sort of that crystal ball for where they expect to be in the coming year or two. Now, as we wind down, I wanted to share some really important resources that you can use today. And if everything I said feels completely exhausting to you and you can't imagine carving out the time to do this, this is the lowest hanging fruit I can give you with the highest return. It's called the Fundraising Effectiveness Project. And it is a tool that's put out through AFP, the Association of Fundraising Professionals, the global organization. And it's called the Fundraising Fitness Test. It is an Excel document that you download from their website that allows nonprofits to measure and evaluate their fundraising programs against a set of over 100 performance indicators by 5 donor giving levels. What you do is you download your giving history from your donor database. All you need is a donor ID, a date of gift, and a gift amount. So you download that into an Excel format, and that exists on its own. Then you just plug those numbers into the fundraising fitness test, which again is a downloadable Excel sheet that runs macros on the back end that calculates your data. So you're not turning your data over to any third-party source. It doesn't go back to AFP in any way. It's not identifiable to specific donors since it's using your donor ID in your own personal database. And then it runs in the background. And within about 30 minutes, it pulls together an entire list of performance indicators, including donor retention rates. So what I was talking about earlier, looking at new donor retention, repeat donor retention, overall donor retention, donor gains, losses, and net, dollar gains, losses, and net, growth in giving in dollars, growth in number of donors, and donor attrition. Gift range categories, it also breaks down into these various giving levels. And all you have to do is go to afpfep.org, download the toolkit, and then run this. You can do this immediately after your webinar. Hopefully some of you are doing this right now as I speak, but it is an incredible tool and will give you all of this really actionable data that doesn't require you to run different reports from your program. Once you run this, then you can employ some of the strategies for segmenting your donors that we discussed earlier in this presentation. But it is just a really incredible thing. And this is one of the sheets. So it's about 8 sheets in a workbook on Excel that it pulls through. And this is sample data that's comparing different years. But if you break it down here, all I did was put in a sample list of data by donor ID, date, and amount, and you plug in obviously what your fiscal year would be. And it calculates all of these percentages and all of these numbers for you. It is such an incredible tool and does the work of what a statistics team or a data entry team or your database administrator would be able to do over really several weeks building these reports on their own. So I highly recommend you go and visit, again, afpfep.org and run the fundraising fitness test for your own organization. And then just some further resources for those of you who are interested in this topic, are looking for something beyond what I'm able to share in this webinar. These are 2 books that are sort of the prospect research holy grail information pieces. Prospect Research, A Primer for Growing Nonprofits by Cecilia Hogan. So this book is a little bit older now, but this is what I really started with when I first started with prospect research about 10 years ago. And has information just across the gamut for small shops, large shops, and what you might want to use. It does get updated, but if you're looking for something that is less specific prospect research focused and looking for more ways to integrate it into your general day-to-day fundraising, Prospect Research for Fundraisers, The Essential Handbook by Jennifer Filla and Helen Brown is another excellent resource that I highly recommend engaging with for some more tips and tricks for this. And with that, I am done talking and would like to turn this over to any questions that may have come in.
Thank you so much, Ashley. Wow, what a breadth of information that you have just given us this morning. And we're getting many comments just with so much gratitude. I think it's very timely to be thinking about this and really trying to plan out your strategy in the coming months, especially with so much uncertainty right now. I'd love to reiterate and welcome any questions. I also want to be cognizant of time. We are at 11:35 right now.
Oh my goodness.
So much wonderful information. And right now, I don't have any questions from the attendees, but I do have some questions myself. If you're okay with staying a little bit for a question.
Yeah,
okay.
Absolutely.
All right, wonderful. So a lot of what you had discussed, I'm so curious if you could speak to translating some of these things during this time of quarantine and shelter in place.
Mm-hmm.
You had mentioned just like the importance of, very much like having a high touch strategy when trying to outreach to new donors or maybe existing donors. Can you talk about the best ways to translate that digitally? Is it a Zoom call?
Absolutely.
Is it a phone call?
Yeah, so I think that there are different ways, and I think some of it is really touching in on donor preference. I am a big fan of direct phone calls. I think that particularly in this environment, I know in the fundraising field and myself personally, there's a little bit of Zoom fatigue. And so I think reaching out to people initially, either by email to set up a phone call to ask their preference or to just call them and thank them and start a discussion is a good way to kind of meet people where they're interested. I think for some of our more sophisticated donors who are maybe more involved with your organization, I really recommend setting up Zoom meetings. I think that the technology piece, people are getting more comfortable with it. I think being patient and also showing a little bit of humility. We were actually talking about this earlier, but I think that just being honest that this is obviously uncomfortable for a lot of people. This isn't an ideal way to meet, but that we're really excited to kind of deepen our relationships and use this time to find out why people are interested in our organizations in a way we may not have time for driving around everywhere for these meetings. I've also found that within our organization, people are really receptive to having a conversation and then kind of setting up tentative meetings for later. So saying, I'd love to reach out in November
Mhm.
and touch base. And if we're able to meet in person, I'd love to come see you. If we're not, then I'd just love to hear how you're doing and ways that you've engaged with our organization during this time. And I think now is a good time to also ask people how they want to hear from your organization when we're not having in-person events, when we're not able to go visit them where they are. Do they want more frequent newsletter communication? Are they just completely over inundated by email and prefer phone calls? Things like that.
Yeah, wonderful. I mean, I'm just getting some comments just talking about how great the presentation is and that Paul will be sharing the presentation with his board. So
Thanks, Paul.
then I have a question here. Will the presentation be available to reference? Yes, we will be sending the presentation after the close of this webinar, as well as if you are interested, it will also be uploaded. The entire presentation will be uploaded to our YouTube. I'm going to also ask another question that kind of struck me during your presentation, which is you had mentioned taking time to look at your retention and the amount that you're bringing in based off of new donors and then donors lost. Like, what point of the year do you often suggest that you look into these type of things? Like, how often are your check-ins?
Right.
What time of the year?
So, I mean, it would be in a perfect world, you're doing this throughout the year, multiple points, but I think that nobody really has time to do that. So at the end of your fiscal year is a great time to look and evaluate whether the strategies you employed in the previous year were giving you the results you wanted. I also think doing a mid-year checkpoint. So looking at halfway through the year, did the shifts in your strategy, are they leading you to the results you want? Or do you need to shift your strategy a little bit? Like, would you expect to be performing better? I think that we know typically at the end of the calendar year, they say that you should be about 60% of your fundraising through the year. So we would anticipate that you've overperformed there because a lot of people give it calendar year end when they're looking at receiving kind of that final push for tax benefit. And so if you've hit that point and you are not at that level, then maybe it's looking at how you can more intentionally reach out, looking at what the data is telling you, and then shifting your strategy at that point.
Thank you. So helpful. And I actually am getting a question if you're open to receiving emails at all. I'm also like, as you can see, she has included her email right there in the slides. So please, if there are some follow-up questions that you feel more comfortable maybe asking offline, you can contact Ashley right there, abrown@icfs.org.
And I also encourage you to consider, if you want to send me an email and set up some time to talk on the phone, I would be happy to not be looking at my own face while
You are
talking
a
on
big
Zoom.
phone enthusiast. I'm getting that.
Yeah, it would be nice. I think sometimes it's hard to talk through some of the challenges that we're having with our data. And so feel free to send me an email, but also I'm happy to talk offline as well.
Thank you so much. Well, if there aren't any other questions, I think that this is a close for us. Thank you so much again, Ashley, for
My pleasure.
taking the time to just give us so much information that's very, very timely right now. And thank you everyone for joining us. In the chat, I've actually included a link to our newsletter and subscribing so that you can stay in touch with the center. I'm going to share it in the chat again. If you subscribe, you'll be able to keep in touch and also be aware of other upcoming webinars and workshops that we have in the schedule to support our community. So thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.